This alliance is comprised of the Australian, Canadian, New Zealand, UK, and US Defense Forces. My name is Colonel Diane Klein. I am the DISA Europe Commander located in Stuttgart, Germany. And at this time, I would like to turn the floor over to my partners, starting with Commander Alexander, to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about who they are, their missions, and then we'll have a few questions, and then we'll open up the floor to any audience questions that you may have. So thank you for coming. Amy, over to you.
Hi, so Commander Amy Alexander, as just nicely introduced, thank you very much, Ma'am. I'm the longest serving liaison officer in DISA, but as well as being the longest serving liaison officer, the UK has had the longest relationship with DISA in terms of having an LO in the building. So it's great from my perspective to see us now sit here as a Five Eyes Alliance. We haven't been in the full Five Eyes state for a while, and I won't steal all of the words of my colleagues because some of them are not full-time DISA, whereas myself and Adrian are both full-time acting in that liaison officer role. And one question I'm often asked is, what does a liaison officer do? It's a massive sort of remit. We have an organisation in the UK called Defence Digital. It's the equivalent, on a much smaller scale, the UK being slightly smaller than the US, of DISA headquarters and JFHQ Doden. And we cover off the same responsibilities within our sort of smaller scale confines. So, where do I see it moving in the future? Bilaterally, we've done a lot of work with the US, and now we're moving further and further into that Five Eyes community. And one of the roles we fill here as liaison officers is understanding what's going on in the other countries and making sure that we're not duplicating effort and making the same mistakes or gaining the same advantages without actually making sure we optimise how we're delivering that capability. As a liaison officer, I'm an expert in nothing. I spend my life talking to people in the US, people in the Five Eyes partners, but also people in the UK, and finding out who best needs to speak to who in the other country. My job is to be that sort of matchmaker, make sure that if the US is struggling to achieve something or the UK is struggling to achieve something, we can share ideas, we can share sort of skill sets and make sure we gain that technology advantage and move forward with that development of capability. So we focus really on both capability development, but also on resolution of issues and understanding where our sort of strengths and weaknesses are. And it gives me great pleasure sometimes to sit in a briefing in the US and then in the UK in the same day and discover that we're all having the same frustration with our people not doing their iPhone updates or not sort of achieving what we need them to achieve to maintain that cybersecurity. So from our perspective, my role out here is one that I relish and enjoy, but also just lets us build a bigger picture and be a product that's greater than the sum of our parts. I will now hand over to my right.
Thank you. My name is Major Michael Chivers. I'm for my sins, the sole CIS Data Digital Liaison Officer to the US. Hence Amy's comments about my part-time nature. I work predominantly in the realm of the Combined Communications Electronics Board, Five Eyes organisation based out of the Pentagon. However, being a band of one, I also work with MPCO, DCIO, Joint Staff J6, and I'm also the Commonwealth, i.e. the non-US rep to the CFBL net. And when I'm not doing that, I'm also part-time executive officer for our science community in the defence realm. So very thinly spread, but as Amy mentioned, yeah, we are about the matchmaking, putting people together. Actually, I think more like speed dating, but yeah, it's quite surprising, actually. Well, it is for us, but it's probably not for the US. You're so large that there are these organisations out there that are here to help, to get you into the organisations across our 4 other countries. And probably as much as anything else, our job is education, to let the greater US DoD know, A, that they do have a relationship with 4 other countries, which is quite intimate, and also special, but it's also we are there to help. And so many times we've heard today how the sum of the parts is always greater than the single entity. So without further ado, I'll hand across to Canada.
So, it's your Oh, I'm on. Okay. So hi, I'm Major Axel Sunquist. I just a newly minted DISA member. I've come from Canada starting in January of this year. And I'm a little bit different than Commander Amy and Lieutenant Colonel Adrian in that I'm here on exchange. So the benefit of that is that I'm getting to learn how DISA works as part of the DISA organization. And I have a counterpart, another Major Scott Widener, who's a U.S. Army officer who's in Canada learning the same in Canada. So what I'm bringing to the table hopefully is a breadth of experience from my operational experience both in Afghanistan and in the Vancouver Olympics, and taking my operational work as a coalition partner and now bring it into the U.S. side to see things from a different perspective. So it not only helps both countries in terms of preventing groupthink, it also brings a new way of looking at the same problems into the organization in DISA. So I'm looking forward to working with my colleagues in the U.S., having the opportunity to represent the U.S. as an LO. You're working for the UK, or you're working for Australia or New Zealand, but as an exchange officer, I'm here working on behalf of the U.S. as if I were a U.S. major, and hopefully I can bring some of that interesting experience, or looking at the lens through another way to provide that similar perspective and grow with that organization. And build the bonds that we have. I was just, one little anecdote I was just going to bring just to symbolize our relationship is if we go back to Alexander Graham Bell, he was born in Scotland, he immigrated to Canada, invented the telephone, then he married an American in 1870, and then he became an American citizen. So if you look at that in terms of innovation and the way we work together as a coalition, we've been working together for over 3 centuries now, and both militarily, culturally, etc. We're representing half a billion people, and both militarily, culturally, and politically. And it's a union that's worked well for us, both militarily and intellectually, etc. And that's all I'll say. Over.
G'day ladies and gents, my name's Lieutenant Colonel Adrian Trapper, and I don't think I really need to explain what a liaison officer does anymore because my peers to my left have already done that. Hey look, I'm an Australian Army Signals Officer by trade. I'm currently employed as the Australian Defence Force Liaison Officer to DISA and JFHQ Doden. I arrived in the US in January of last year to be met by Amy and schooled in terms of I guess the whys and the hows of dealing with my American colleagues, and it's been an absolute pleasure to be here. So back home I work for the Australian Department of Defence, of course, and in particular the Chief Information Officers Group. So as you would appreciate, Australia's just a little bit tad smaller in scale than the US DoD. So our Chief Information Officers Group has a blanket over all of our networks that are managed within Defence. We only have 3, a restricted, a secret, and maybe a couple of TS networks. But for the main, we're pretty flat, and we can manage it all within that Chief Information Officers group. I specifically work for a Major General Murray Thompson, who's our head of our ICT Operations Division. ICT Operations Division is what we like to equate to DISA. And again, our Chief Information Officers Group is obviously broadly the same as the level at DoD CIO's office as well. So as the liaison officer on behalf of Major General Thompson, I represent his equities with General Skinner in operational matters and working, obviously pretty topical at the moment, current focus obviously in the South Pacific region. And also capability development opportunities, making sure that we're keeping, staying aligned with our Five Eye partners in terms of developing our new capabilities, so we can interoperate into the future. Again, I would just say that the US and Australia in particular have had a rich operational history over the past 100 years. I think we observed it's been 100 years of mateship, as we called it. Since World War I, we've been involved in every conflict to date, and side by side. And DISA have always played a part for us since its inception in providing some communications to help Australians into the battle space there. So to come into the organisation, understand it and be part of it has been a real privilege to be here. And again, like Axel, I just share a very short anecdote during a visit by my boss last year where he was speaking to General Skinner and started to reflect about how he was the manager of the second largest telecommunications provider in Australia, to which General Skinner didn't want to brag or anything, but then told him he was the second largest telecommunications provider in the world. It was a very humbling moment for my boss, but again, it puts everything in perspective, and we're really privileged to be part of this with such great friends. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So Amy alluded to it a little bit earlier, Commander Alexander did, about how many of us have, the same communication challenges. If you talk to any communications officer in the world, generally you can find something to bond over of when something didn't happen, whether it was your PowerPoint slides not coming up correctly or the microphone cutting off as soon as the general has to speak. But so I wanted to talk a little bit about, what are the challenges of communicating between the Five Eyes partners, and then how do those challenges increase as we move into a multi-partner coalition that goes beyond the Five Eyes, but with our NATO partners and other mission partners?
So I'll lead off. I think one of the things that we find quite almost entertaining is how different our structures are. So you don't sort of sit here and, you can map the US structure, you know how your system works, where the CIO sits, where General Skinner sits as the sort of commander of DISA, and it's different for every nation. So it's not like, oh, this visitor's coming, who should they see, who should they talk to, who's responsible for what? It's so similar but yet so subtly different that it takes us a lot of effort sometimes to just map our sort of differences and transparencies and make sure that we're optimizing the use of people's time. It's so frustrating for us when somebody comes to the US and at the end of their visit they say, oh, I wish I'd seen so-and-so. And you just think, oh, and actually for us, being LOs and based within the organisation, over the nearly 2 years I've been here, I've learnt a lot about who my visitors should speak to and who is the optimum person to make sure we maximise capability delivery and maximise information sharing to benefit of all nations.
Thank you. Yeah, look, echo those sentiments. My boss is the SJ6, 6 for my Australian colleagues. But I was waiting for a pour because there was always one coming from the Australians. So my boss is the SJ6. He's a full colonel. His parallel on the CCB principles is lieutenant. Sorry, Mary O'Brien. And here again, just with that, you can see some of the issues I would have getting my colonel in front of a lieutenant general. Same my CIO, who is also SJ6. He's a one-star, yet he sits at the same table as the Honourable Mr. Sherman, and we will be doing that in Halifax in a couple of weeks' time. So there is that scale issue. Colonel Trappett talks about how small Australia is. Well, you divide that by 5 and I think you get where New Zealand is. So we have challenges of size, and size comes money. But also, there's certain things in this organisation that regardless of how big or small you are, you've got certain things you have to deliver on. And to be part of a secret network, we've got to have the same things in place that the US do. And one of our major challenges, and I think we all have it, but is keeping good staff. Relying on contractors where we can. Typically New Zealand we don't so much, but keeping staff, especially in that cyber area, is interesting. And perhaps I'll leave it there.
So I was going to say one of the really cool things about working here is that you see some of the same problems across the alliance. One of the biggest challenges I think that all the countries are working on is how to make sure when we do come into a coalition, and even with our coalition partners, because we each have good relationships with different countries beyond the Five Eyes circle, is how do we come together quickly in order to be decisive in our operations and have the upper hand in terms of information superiority. One of the challenges I think, and that was highlighted today at lunch, was the data assurance and making sure that we're all speaking the same English, for example. We all have slightly different acronyms and different ways of using English. Some of us can understand both of us. Some of us can have two conversations at the same time using the Queen's English and the American English. The challenge is making sure that when you come to an operation, and I'll simplify it down to an Excel spreadsheet, if you're all collecting the same information, but you each come with a different Excel spreadsheet, it's very difficult to merge that information into one common view across the board. And if we're able to standardize our architectures and the way we collect data, the way we label the data, then whatever we build in each country, when we decide to share, when we decide to work together, it's quick to tie those technical solutions together and then enable the decision makers to do what they need to do at the time and place of their desire. Without that common framework or the same standard template of an Excel spreadsheet, when I'm simplifying things, it's going to be very difficult to integrate and do the higher level things with knowledge management or understanding and decisive decision making across the board. And I'll only say that sometimes, like for example, in the Olympics, depending on where your threat was coming from, you had different commanders that had to use the same information and have the lead of that activity and have the same information concurrently across the board to understand which one would be making the decision and which one was in support of the decision. And that goes across international boundaries and different parts of your coalition as well. And that's all I'll go with that.
Very good.
Thanks.
Hey, look, ma'am, look, I'll take a slightly different tact on that. So Monday last week, the Australian government announced the findings of what we've called the Defence Strategic Review. It was an 18-month-long journey for us, with our a previous Defence Minister and a previous Chief of Defence Force conducting a study into working out whether the Australian Defence Force is still fit for purpose, potentially for the next fight. What they found overall was that we are largely still fit for purpose, but there is some change that needs to occur. And when we get back to the term of interoperability or discussing interoperability, that's a big deal for us because we know that in our neck of the woods, we need all the partners and all the friends that we can muster in order to enter. So I guess part of my role here in DISA is looking at how do we rapidly take advantage of disruptive new technologies, and General Skinner talked about that yesterday. Certainly that's a focus for the Australian government and how we actually bring that in. But it's handy to know what DISA is looking at in the initial instance, so we can actually make some informed decisions about whether that's where we might also want to go. You might be also aware that Australia is acquiring some conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarines into the future, and again, with all and the government has also announced some long-range fires capabilities. So underlying all of that is a digital backbone that's going to be critical for us, supported by Chief Information Officers Group with our friends DISA.
Okay, thank you. So as we go through this challenge of getting our equipment and all of our systems to talk to each other, one of the important aspects of it is making sure that all of that data is secure and our networks are secure. It's relatively easy to connect in an unsecure environment over the web. But so the next question is, how do we best balance the user experience as we secure our networks and secure our data in this multinational coalition environment and data sharing environment?
I think we should let Adrian start this time.
Yeah. Hey, look, it's that's a tough question. And I know Australia. I know the US Air Force have just started. I think it's a chief experience officer, if I'm not mistaken, and we followed suit with someone very similar to make sure that our users are getting what they need, but also maintaining the security of the network. So, again, unfortunately for us, it's a relatively new journey as we start to work through some of these challenges. As I said, but just making sure that we can actually do the job we need to do, but at the same time maintain our secure communications. Yeah. I'm sorry.
On that end, I would say I think some of the challenges, at least from my own experience, is that we forget that we've had 50 years of developing processes, procedures, and ways of doing business across the alliance. And a lot of that is required to be understood and well read so that we don't repeat history. If you don't learn it, we repeat it. So I would argue that, and sometimes we're always being told that we're going to create this new cloud, when in fact I would argue that the cloud is actually already here. It's been here for a very long time. I would suggest it's an analog cloud and now we're trying to evolve the technology that supports those processes into the digital world, but using IP. So we have, like through the CCV, etc., you've got a lot of agreements and interoperability and standardization processes that have been established for many, many years. And now how do we make sure that the historical links that we've built, say in the 1960s or the 1950s in terms of interrelationships and circuits, how do we make sure that those aren't broken when we transition to an IP technology or into the cloud? So coming back to that Excel spreadsheet, how do we build on what we already have rather than starting from scratch again and having to reestablish those links that we've built over 40 years?
So I think that's a really great point, and I think on top of that is also ensuring that one, we don't overclassify our data so that we can share. I know on the U.S. side, it's a continual frustration that sometimes we tend to overclassify our data, and then our partners don't have access to it. But also, that's an area I think where industry can certainly help in ensuring that the tools that we use, because we all use different tools to do some very similar things, that those tools could talk to each other and have interoperability across those different proprietors.
Look, yeah, I suppose the way that we best handle that from a New Zealand perspective is engaging with our partners, making sure that we're not a liability when we deploy, and in fact that we can actually cash a few of those checks that we write, because and this is the realm of the major exercises that our partners invite us to, so that we can assess where we're at, make sure that our people can deliver on the IT and cyber solutions that we need. And this is the likes of CWIX and BoltQuest, Talisman Sabre, and some of the initiatives coming out of Indo-PACOM. So, it's a struggle, and I think we all find it hard, but best we become au fait with the practice in peacetime, or peace-ish time, than having to learn lessons learned under different conditions.
So, I'll copy Adrian's lead and take a slightly different tack. I think for me, one of the parts of my role which I hadn't really anticipated was so much of the sort of gateways and the connections are out there to enable us to speak from sort of a US secure telephone to a UK secure telephone. It's that people don't know the numbers they need to dial, or don't know the process they need to follow, or just don't realise the capability exists. Early in my tenure, we did a secure VTC between Lieutenant General Skinner and my boss back in the UK. And actually, it was as seamless as if we'd been on a US to US system. It's just gaining that understanding and making sure that the user guides are both out there and that people understand them and have read them and acknowledge that we do have the capability. Yes, it could be improved, and yes, there is work underway to develop and make things better and more seamless, and to enable us to add in additional partners, because you've got the Five Eyes community sat here, but depending on what area of conflict we're going to and what area of the world we're trying to operate in, we regularly want to add in additional partners and add in additional people that we need to work with, and the seamless nature of that ability to communicate across the gateways and across the different systems is what makes us better than the sum of our parts.
Okay, thank you, Commander Alexander. So the last question I have before we open it up to audience questions regards the challenge of retaining and recruiting a trained cyber workforce. These are highly skilled, highly knowledgeable positions that we all have to keep. So how are your armed forces addressing the challenges of recruiting and retaining that cyber talent across your forces?
With difficulty. There is no sensible answer. All you can do, I think, is make the jobs appear attractive. Yes, the pay and benefits may not be the same as industry offering, but the job security that is offered by the sort of federal employment can be far, far sort of superior. So there isn't a sensible answer. There isn't a good answer. It's something I think all nations struggle with. But trying to keep hold of those good people and give them the opportunities for development is an area which we've sort of focused on in the UK, so that they can continue to grow and stay within the systems they're in. But of course, the other side of the coin is I watched a good serviceman leave recently, but he's gone to work for one of our contractors, and I still see him in the office, on a routine basis. When I was back in the UK last week, I saw him in the dining hall at lunchtime. Life hasn't changed. Yes, we're no longer getting his expertise in the way we did, but we're not losing out on some of the training we gave him before he left the military.
Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate those comments. Yeah, and I've alluded to it in a couple of the other answers as well. But retaining people is a struggle. In fact, sometimes I think we feel like we're training the people for the wider government audience and perhaps industry. But is that a bad thing? Probably not, because when you talk about whole of government, yeah, that does mean something. So yeah, it is a struggle, and really the people aren't out there. We've got to bring them on board, train them. One of my things while I was here was to actually find out some sort of wider training frameworks that we could look at to incorporate within our signals trade. So yeah, happy to look at that as well.
I think we're all having challenges. I think one of the things is how to rebuild the mystique of, you see the Top Gun movie in the 80s, everyone wanted to be a fighter pilot. How do we reinvigorate that kind of a challenge? Because I think youth and other people in the industry, that if you wanted to be in the military context, there's very cool things that we're doing. As long as we're able to articulate how we operationalize what we're doing in IT, and how does that help and enable a guy that's sitting in a desk in a cubicle working on an algorithm, how do we link that and show him that he's doing something that's critical to some soldier in Afghanistan or in an operational theater, and he's having a direct impact on how the U.S. national interests are executed. I think there's a challenge in understanding how some of the boring stuff we're doing is so critical to enabling our military or our democracy to be sustained. So I think if we could focus on that, it would be much helpful. But unfortunately, a lot of what we do is classified. So how do you express those cool things that we've done, and take advantage of that when you're dealing with young people that have really cool things to offer? And then how do you mentor them so that you take their unbridled expertise or brilliance as a 12-year-old that knows how to crack a VCR better than me, or even knows what a VCR is or something new, and how do you link him up with somebody really smart that has the operational and organizational experience, so they can both work as a team to actually bring the knowledge that the one has in the world where he can be digitized using the skills of the younger, more inexperienced individual.
Look here, so in the Australian Army we have what we call critical categories, and they're generated for the Chief of Army on an annual basis, and it's where we're facing most risk with our workforce. And I think for the past 3 years running, the Royal Australian Corps of Signals workforce has been almost to every single one of our 5 trades has been on that critical categories list, because again the teams are just so employable beyond defence as well. So I think what we're focusing on at the moment, and I agree with all my fellow FVEY members' comments, but it's focusing on their ability to conduct the mission. So it's all about the mission, and Axel explained. It's how are you supporting the warfighter, understanding that there's a downrange effect on what you're doing back in Canberra, for example. It's the ability to get their hands on the tools, and it's not the tools that we were using 20 years ago. It's the tools that we should be using either now or as best we can, closest what's current now. So using putting the tools, most relevant tools, in our soldiers, sailors, and airmen's hands. And what we're doing also is exchanges here in the US in particular, and also over in the UK. We are sending our workforce over to conduct missions, particularly cyber missions, at US Cyber Command with those elements there, so they're gaining experience. And again, it links back to their ability to conduct the mission. They can actually see how it's done. I guess more broadly, again, I did have a look at this on the ADF website. We now have an office which is the Employment Modernisation Program, and they're focusing on, I guess, 3 key areas: recruitment, retention, and housing of all things. Because we all got to live somewhere, we've all got families, and we've all got someone else who will tell us when they've had enough. So that's another thing to consider, and where you live, I think, is a big deal. So they're doing a rather large plug on housing. So in terms of retention bonuses, I've seen that the ADF is considering a retention bonus for our younger workforce to encourage them to try and stay in for just at least another 4 years. beyond their initial minimum period of service. So we'll see how that works out. It has worked in the past, so yeah.
Okay, thanks. So what it sounds like we need is a Top Gun hackers movie. Tom Cruise flying a keyboard could go a long way to helping us with recruiting. But in some of the areas that the U.S. has been working is internships. We offer internships not just to college students. I have one working in my office who is a full-time college student online, and during the day he works in my office doing some of our mobility support and hoping we can keep him on. We also offer it to high school students for summer and summer interns for college students, and that's throughout some of the Department of Defense agencies. And then, of course, we, like everyone else, we throw the bonuses for the enlistment for our technical recruiting and we're trying to retain them with re-enlistment bonuses. So a number of areas, but it's still hard because there are a lot of lucrative things out there for them to do with the tech world, and it is sometimes hard to really convey how that can translate to the impact that it can make working either in uniform or out of uniform for the Department of Defense. So that concludes my questions for the panel. I'd like to turn it over to the audience and see if we have any questions out here. Please come to the microphone.
Hi, I'll take the first one. Thank you all. A couple of you have mentioned data interoperability and how important that is. And I'm really interested in who does that, and is there a forum or a mechanism to work on that? Or is it just kind of a side thing with other types of interoperability? Can any of you describe any of that?
Perhaps I can mention that, because upcoming the next 2 weeks we have a forum as part of the CCB with all the SJ6s getting together. At the same time, the CIOs are also at that same venue, and more recently we've now had the involvement of the Chief Data Officers from across the Five Eyes. So they are getting together. It'll be interesting to see what their terms of reference are, because they're sort of in a position to sort of eke out where they're going, because they really, from our perspective anyway, weren't there beforehand. And one of the starting blocks, I suppose, is the recently published US minimum essential metadata, which is a start point for discussion rather than an end point, I think. Certainly, I know that colleagues from across the ditch have a few issues with that. So, has anyone else got any comments?
So I think one of the things that we as our role as liaison officers see is that trying to make sure that our own country are following the lead of the sort of wider community. And one of the topics we talked about earlier today was we throw a lot of buzzwords around, zero trust being the one I've heard most this week. But actually, what does zero trust mean to the US? What does it mean to the UK? We've got to make sure, and that's where we sort of act in that liaison function, that our nations all have the same definitions of those key terms, so that we then meet the same standards and can have that sort of joining relationship that allows us then to share communications.
No.
Okay, thank you.
I thought he did, but he didn't.
Okay, thank you. So next question, please.
Hi, I'm Bobby Westerman from KBR. We're partnered with DISA to stand up the DISA Works environment with the Emerging Technologies Directorate down here in Columbia, Maryland. My question for the Alliance is there a method or means of bringing a capability forward direct to the Alliance that could enable interoperability and secure communications so it could be shown to the Alliance in whole?
The exercises.
I think, if I understand what you're asking, is there a way for you to present that capability or for a vendor to prevent that capability to the Five Eye Alliance at a given point? I think you said it. I think Major Sundquist said it. I think the opportunity for that is a lot of our exercises, interoperability exercises, that we have throughout that. Those all would be opportunities. Obviously, opportunities like this, we're trying to build more alliance opportunities to come together. And then over to you. You two.
I was just going to say, the reason I'm here on Exchange is there's an MOU between the U.S. and Canada, and in that MOU it identifies the fact that we're here, and the principles of the MOU is that we identify opportunities or projects that could be beneficial, and it also allows for contractors or individuals within the public service or in the military to work across borders. So if I would also suggest in my previous job, there's a lot of work going on in terms, I think DARPA's doing similar things, but there's a lot of opportunities to develop and innovate with defense research and development in Canada. And one of the challenges that I know our military is trying to do is figure out if you collaborate on an experimental or an exercise opportunity to demonstrate things in a lab, how do you then translate that work or collaboration into an opportunity to scale it and then deliver it to the entire organization as an actual operational tool? I think one of the challenges I think for industry is that they need to understand our processes, and if you look at the Federated Mission Network specifications that CCV's developed or anything like that, there's opportunities and information widely available through NATO, etc., identifying how the military works. And if you can identify a challenge within that, or how you're going to improve a process that the military's got documented throughout our libraries, then there's probably an opportunity to showcase that or present that to leadership in our militaries, and then potentially get on an exercise and prove that it works in an operational environment.
So, yeah, I agree that there is the opportunity. MPE was the realm of DISA. People are going to throw it at me, but now sits with MPCO. And that organisation does have the ability to sort of push it out through exercises, through things that, through the Joint Staff J6 and their Bold Quest series of activities and CWIC. So, there's no such thing as a bad idea. One of the problems we have in Australia is that we're not part of NATO, so we've got to sort of blend where we play and the like. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Okay, thank you everybody for attending this Five Eyes Alliance panel. It is always a privilege to sit up here with my counterparts and allies, so thank you very much for being here, and everyone have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.